From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Surrogates, released in 2009, starring Bruce Willis, Radha Mitchell, and Ving Rhames. Directed by Jonathan Mostow. The synopsis is, set in a futuristic world, humans interact in the real world through robots called surrogates. When two destroyed surrogates lead to a double suicide, FBI agent Tom Greer uncovers a deadly cover-up. The story. The source material for the film is The Surrogates, a 5-issue comic book limited series written by Robert Venditti and drawn by Brett Weldell from 2005 to 2006. Robert Venditti read Indira Shinha's book, Cyber Gypsies, about characters who were so addicted to their internet personas that they lost their spouses and jobs. In the future, the central Georgia metropolis has a series of crimes by techno-terrorist Steeplejack, who wants to disconnect humanity from their android avatars. What a cool concept! And Disney thought it was cool too, which they acquired the rights in 2007 with Touchstone Pictures. Husband and wife team Max Hendelman and Elizabeth Banks spearheaded the project with their company Brownstone Productions, and this was their film debut as producers. Michael Ferris and John Brancato adapted the comic, and Jonathan Mostow was hired to direct the film. To promote the film, many of the cast members and the director talked about their main inspiration for being part of the film. They seemed to be very concerned about the way we were moving towards the world of this movie, and mainly had something against people spending so much time on their cell phones. Humans were losing their connection to each other because of their attachment to their phones and computers. That mindset still exists today, but here's a little history on why the motivation for this movie was a product of 2009 directly. In order to understand this, we must review a little history. So here we go. Although the first cell phone was invented in 1973, cell phones were not widely used until the very late 1990s and became mainstream for most people in the year 2000. In 2003, more elaborate phones like BlackBerry were huge, being sold as a personal computer in your pocket. We had the arrival of Facebook in 2004, YouTube in 2005, and Twitter in 2006. The smartphone as we know it eventually appeared 2 years prior to this movie in 2007, where you could engage with all of these social communities on your phone. And that changed the way humans interacted with their cell phones. The film takes place in 2017, only 8 years into the future of the release of this film. The novel took place in 2054, which I think is actually more plausible. And that would be enough time for a society to adopt robots to replace us in the real world. I personally have a lot of problems with the technical probability presented in the film. But there's something very interesting there that I just love, to be honest, and I think it's worthy of conversation. The film also has 2 other story plots of a murder mystery and a family drama. Now the pacing. At 1 hour and 29 minutes, the pacing is very fast, with a heaping mountain of exposition in the beginning. This film earns a very high score for pacing. Now the challenge. So the challenge is very interesting. So let me set you up with the story in which the film does in a timeline montage at the very beginning of the film. It details 14 years of innovation since 2003 that led to the film's present day, which clearly establishes, in my mind, that this is an alternative universe to the one that we live in. I believe 2003 is when the timeline splits from our universe into this alternative one. In 2003 is where the first brain studies detailing the use of thoughts to move robotics using sensors start to become a big deal, just like it did in the real world. The big difference in the timeline was the existence of the inventor of the surrogates, Dr. Lionel Cantor, in this movie's universe. It was actually his hope that physically disabled people like himself would be able to operate fully synthetic bodies, not just missing parts, which is kind of odd because if you need a replacement arm, then maybe you just need a robotic arm, not a full synthetic body. But that's the issue in our story, is that this whole concept is just replacing people completely. All the surrogates are produced by Cantor's company, VSI, Virtual Self Industries. These surrogates for humans are basically puppets controlled remotely by a user strapped into a STEM chair where they operate the robot. Technology is being developed in the real world to create robots to be more human-like for practical use and entertainment and to do jobs that human beings don't want to do anymore. We also have androids made in the likeness of real people, some of which were actually featured in the beginning of the film. In 2006, the technology was harnessed for military and industrious use. And then, eventually, the surrogates became affordable to the general public. The key sales pitch is that this gave users the ability to work without risk or danger, to have the perfect body without genetics, working out, or plastic surgery. I mean, who wants to sign up for that, okay? I'm afraid that I would completely and totally raise my hand. Heck, I already use an avatar, so yeah, why not? That sounds like a great deal. Today, there's a huge emphasis on looks. And we see this where we have influencers who tweak their photos and look flawless, not to mention the cosmetic procedures many of them make to present a wrinkle-free skin, smaller noses, higher cheekbones, sexier eyes, slimmer faces, slimmer bodies, curvier bodies. And the pressure to be a perfect individual or perfect looking individual has really increased in our own real world. So I think this is a very interesting dynamic that's also featured in the film, that to use an avatar or use a surrogate would be much better than actually trying to put in the effort themselves, because it is unrealistic, right? Let's face it, it's unrealistic. So, and instead of going to the gym, I mean, this is happening now. Instead of going to the gym, there are people who are implanting muscles. These are incredibly unattainable standards that are part of yet another commentary in the film about the emphasis on perfect physical aesthetics. And I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed that about the stories, making these little comments that are kind of like a reflection of our own world, but at the same time, that isn't really the main focus of the story. So let's get back to the story. What's even more astounding is that in this alternative universe, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the use of surrogates in daily life. I mean, what? In real life, the Supreme Court is still trying to understand what TikTok is, okay? So that would be an incredible feat. By 2010, over 98% of the world population uses a surrogate. And this one is a bit hard to believe because in the real world, it took another 11 years for 91.62% of the world's population just to have cell phones in 2021. So it's definitely not something that would have been achievable like 10 years ago. But, for the sake of the movie, they're speeding things along a lot faster than possibly it could have. According to the movie, crime rates have dropped to record lows. There's a reduction in violent crime, communicable disease, and discrimination. And this was about the same time that Dr. Cantor was humiliatingly forced out of VSI by his partners due to a discrepancy about the direction of the company. He went into hiding, and no one has seen him in public ever since. In 2014, Dr. Cantor began secretly funding an anti-surrogacy movement called the Dreads, led by Zaire Powell, aka the Prophet. Ironically, the Prophet is Dr. Cantor's surrogate, preaching to the masses that humans weren't meant to experience the world through machines. It tickles me that he's using the very thing that he's teaching people to hate. So clearly, Dr. Cantor is the main challenge in the film, trying to undo his creation and get revenge for being humiliated by his former partners. The Dreads have established surrogacy-free zones in major cities around the country. After finding out that Dr. Cantor has been funding the anti-surrogacy program, his old partners at VSI were hoping to kill him with a secret military weapon called the OD overload device. This weapon overloads the surrogate with a virus while liquefying the brains of the surrogate user. The partners enlist the help of Andy Stone, director of the local FBI jurisdiction, to hire a low-level criminal by the name of Miles Strickland to execute Dr. Cantor. Miles used the weapon on one of Dr. Cantor's surrogates, but instead of killing Dr. Cantor, he killed Dr. Cantor's son, Jared Cantor. This action is what turns the doctor into his final form of a complete psycho. His dreams of helping the disabled have been twisted. He was kicked out of his own company, and now his only son was killed. He has good reason to be upset and vengeful. However, he wants to take down VSI by destroying all of the surrogates and kill all of the users with the overload device. It's a bit much, right? I think so. I mean, he's gone off the deep end. But you know what? When you think about his thought process, and not saying that it's right, he considers the surrogacy program a perverse addiction in his mind. And it has to be, in his words, has to be dealt with by killing billions of innocent people who use it. You know, I really enjoyed the complexity of Dr. Cantor's character and his overbearing God complex. He changed the world once, and he felt entitled to change it again. He's got a great motivation, and the grief over losing his son was very palpable. I felt the pain in his character when he realized that his son took the bullet for him, so to speak. And it's enough to wreck anyone, and he deserves some retribution for that. But really, I think his insanity really took control and totally blinded his morality. All right, the empathy. The empathy in this film is a little shaky. I mean, I hope you don't think that I hate this movie, because I don't. I really like it a lot. But it's very interesting, and I think it's fascinating. There's a lot to discuss about this film. So a strong criticism that I've heard from many reviewers of this film is that the surrogates seemed robotic. And I think that makes sense, because the surrogates are robots, and many of them look human and they are controlled by humans, but they are essentially robots. And the film really wants you to know that. It goes out of its way to show you how the surrogates are moving in a very robotic way. So it's kind of off-putting for you to try to identify with these characters, because their movements are robotic when they're in their surrogates. The film follows FBI agent Tom Greer's perspective. He spends the first third of the story in his surrogate, where he mostly acts robotic until he has to interact with the real world in his own body. Then we get a taste of what a struggle it is to live in the real world in a human body after it's been stationary for 7 years. And I believe that realistically the recovery would be more severe than what it is in the film, but for the sake of time, I'll suspend my disbelief. And Tom and his partner Jennifer Peters are following their case, which starts out as a double homicide, as I told you at the synopsis. And I also told you about the plot revealing Dr. Cantor as the villain in the story. But Tom goes through a string of breadcrumbs to figure it all out. It's not delivered as directly as I told you. It's gently, slowly peels back over layers and layers and layers, sort of like a detective story. And it's interesting. It had lots and lots of surprises that way. Tom is actually given the opportunity to give up on the case, having his badge and gun confiscated from Andy Stone. However, just to give you an example of Tom's tenacity, he goes the extra mile to get to the truth of what's going on. And at one point, he even gets help from Dr. Cantor in disguise as several surrogates along the way. We have a detour from the plot, though. Tom is simultaneously dealing with the loss of his son due to a fatal car accident, and his wife Maggie was in the accident too, leaving her with a heavy scar across her face and a dependency on medication to manage her emotions. She is in a very delicate mental state, as you can imagine. Every time she looks in the mirror, she sees the loss of her son, and not to mention the disfigurement of the accident. Having a surrogate is helping her to pretend she's okay, but it's not helping her to deal with the reality of what happened to her. The relationship between Maggie and Tom is so fractured that they are not even able to connect with each other without their surrogates. However, Tom has a lofty thought that all of their problems will be solved once they get rid of their surrogates. At least interacting in person would allow them the opportunity to deal with the reality of how the accident left them and build from there. Heck, they may even discover that they don't belong together anymore. But Maggie will hear nothing of it. She wants to continue to wear the mask of the surrogate and pretend everything is fine. This is completely reasonable, and I think it's worthy of its own film. I completely loved all of that. Down the darker aspects of the film is a very sad outcome for Tom's partner, Jennifer Peters. It broke my heart because her surrogate gets hijacked by Dr. Cantor, who hates people so much, and he shows her no mercy. So the last character of mention really here is Bobby, the comedic administrator of the FBI computer system that monitors and controls the surrogate network. I'm not sure why this system is at the FBI and not at the VSI, but it's probably why the two organizations are working together against Dr. Cantor. Bobby is not using a surrogate, though, which makes him special. He's a bit of a trope, but he provides a little deus ex machina techno magic for the story by the end to save everybody. Now, the technical aspects. The technical aspect of the film holds up pretty good. It's not perfect, but it impresses me matched up to a few other sci-fi films of the time. Most of the film took place in Massachusetts, which grounded this film. The exterior of the impressive VSI building is a digitally altered version of the Dallas Bank of America Plaza, also known as the Green Building. There isn't a whole lot of information about the technical aspects of the film, but you can see that there's great artistry to get a lot of the practical robot details featured. A great deal of effort was put into hiring gorgeous actors and actresses so that with the right makeup and digital skin smoothing, the surrogates can have a very flawless look or very plastic look. Then, in contrast, a great deal of makeup was used to exaggerate the users of the surrogates as weaker, older, physically neglected, and unhygienic. I thought that was a pretty cool detail. Now, the performances. The performances of the main cast were pretty good, but it was not without its problems. This is probably why there's so little talk of the making of the film available. I'm not sure what happened, but the film underwent some restructuring. One big thing in particular was that Bruce Willis refused to re-record several of his lines of dialogue, and an expert voiceover actor that could make his voice sound like Bruce's finished his work for him. Now, at face value, you would assume that it must have been some bad blood that caused this, but in March 2022, Bruce announced that he was retiring from acting because of his battle with aphasia, which is a medical diagnosis concerning the loss of ability to understand or express speech caused by brain damage. This was truly sad news and lines up with what might have been going on in this film. He never let up his workload, starring in a total of 144 films. Nevertheless, Bruce was a great lead actor, and even though his style of acting in this was beginning to change, he effectively grounded the film, slowly building the audience's concern for Tom. His performance and contribution is underrated in this. Radha Mitchell was a big standout in the film, playing two characters, Jennifer Peters and Dr. Cantor, and even at one point, Tom Greer. So 3 characters, and I thought she was fantastic. James Cromwell portrays Dr. Cantor, playing him as a grief-stricken father terrorized by his shattered dreams, as well as the moments of emphatic mania and righteous apathy. He plays this role so well that it seems to be a reoccurring role for him. This is the 3rd time that James has played a suicidal inventor. Those other 2 films were Eraser in 1996 and I, Robot in 2009. I was a little disappointed that Ving Rhames was underutilized in this film. He was great as always, giving the character of the prophet lots of gravitas. Now, my enjoyment, it's important to say that I actually adore this film because of the conversation it offers surrounding ethics, technology, and mankind. Absolutely, I do. I love watching it and trying to pick apart the pieces of it and trying to analyze it. After building up some good hard-earned empathy for the characters, the ending really snatches a lot of it away from me by having Tom decide to shut down and permanently destroy all of the surrogates. The rhetoric of the prophet and the mad ravings of Dr. Cantor about how terrible the surrogates are for humans had slowly begun to convert Tom to the side of the anti-surrogate movement. But remember, the film makes an effort to emphasize that surrogacy was used by every facet of life by 98% of the population. So this is really a concerning moment for me, even though the film plays it off as a wonderful moment of liberation with minimal destruction and people leaving their homes in wonder. However, what about airplanes and trains in motion and with humans on board and patients right in the middle of surgeries, cars and trucks on the highways, and a whole bunch of sensitive situations that could cause total and utter disaster? I'm also imagining that Tom would be sent to jail for damaging trillions of dollars worth of other people's property and collapsing the world economy. I hope he enjoyed that hug that he got from his wife at the end of the movie. Now, the part that really rubs me the wrong way about that is that he robbed the users of their agency to choose their own way of life. He has valid feelings about wanting to interact with his wife in person, but to force his wife and billions of people to live without their surrogates is selfish and dogmatic. Absolutely did not like that moment in the film. And yes, there were people who were taking advantage of the surrogates for their own desires and selfish needs, but there were people who needed it for other reasons, including work, the disabled, and people who were life-saving caregivers. So that's my big gripe with the story. It's okay to have the villain do something like this. Absolutely. It would have been great. By having the protagonist do this, it makes the ending bittersweet for the viewer. But it definitely would have been better if he didn't make that decision, but it was inevitable as an outcome from Dr. Cantor's plan. And there's a sense of, okay, the bad guy did it. We can blame it on him. Dr. Cantor refers to the dependency of surrogacy as a form of addiction, and technology, just like eating, sex, drinking, smoking, doing drugs, gambling, are capable of doing the same thing. Each one of us has to decide how we want to balance and manage them in our daily lives. It takes effort and self-awareness. 15 years later from the invention of the smartphone, it seems like a magical time that so much happened that shaped our world today. One could say that we are connecting with other human beings more than ever in ways we never imagined. Especially after experiencing the pandemic lockdowns in 2020, technology has been keeping us connected. Most interviews, promotion, and the actual viewing of the film has been done with some sort of digital device. I mean, I've watched this movie several times on a digital device, and not to mention all of the digital technology that was used to make this film. So the anti-technology aspect of the film feels a little bit hypocritical. I'm not mad at the film for it at all. It's just amusing, to be honest. It makes me like smile a little bit. I find it to be funny. Now, the main point isn't lost on me, though. So much at our disposal to help us, but at the same time, the beauty of life in the real world might be a sacrifice if there's no management. I was chatting with my mom describing the film to her, and she said that it reminded her of an Isaac Asimov short story. The fun we had about a girl and a boy in the future reading about kids from the past that played outside, which humans didn't do anymore. And I thought that was so cool. The balance that we're going to have to make in the future and presently between the digital world and the real world is something that we are still learning to manage, and we have to learn how to manage. I love the food for thought that this film offers as a huge buffet of ideas, even though it's incredibly flawed, but it is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine.
My rating is a 7.9. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. I want to take this moment to recognize my amazing Patreon supporters who are responsible for helping me to produce this video. Many thanks to these incredible movie lovers for their support. And you too can be on this list by heading over to Patreon and getting a bit of behind the scenes stuff that you don't get from me on YouTube. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.